All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's event. My name is Daniel Castro. I'm Vice President of ITIF, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. So today's event is on emerging uses of facial recognition technology in the private sector. Before we begin, just a few logistics. First, the event is being recorded. It's also being webcast for those of you who are joining us online. Welcome. For today's panel, what we're going to do is about an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes of discussion, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So if you're in the room, we encourage your questions. If you're joining us online, if you use Twitter, we're using the hashtag ITIF facial recognition. You're welcome to submit your questions there, and we'll have them in the room. So it seems that every week we're hearing about new uses of facial recognition technology as the technology matures. Recently, I've seen payment systems, including Visa and MasterCard, are beginning to use facial recognition to secure your payments. So when you make a payment online, it can verify that, yes, in fact, it is you using your card. We're seeing airlines using facial recognition to replace boarding passes and to expedite the movement through customs. There's even a new e-bike that we've seen that's using facial recognition to make sure that it's the owner that's taking the e-bike and preventing theft. Last week, I saw BMW unveil a concept car that's using facial recognition. So when you get closer to your car, it'll automatically unlock the doors and welcome you. But there's also a lot of misinformation out there about how the technology works, about the implications of the technology for individuals, and how it's being used. So the goal of today's event is to shed more light on the way that the private sector is using this technology in commercial applications, discuss some of the best practices they're already seeing around how facial technology is being used, and then turn our attention to the policies that can help spur more innovation in this sector, as well as address the privacy and security concerns that some consumers have. So we have a fantastic set of panelists here today. I'm especially grateful that we have some guests from out of town, so we can have some new voices in these conversations as well. Starting on my left, we have Jake Parker, who's Senior Director of Government Relations with the Security Industry Association. Jamie Boone, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Consumer Technology Association. David Ray, the Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel of Rank 1 Computing Corporation, which does facial recognition technology. Mel Shantz, who's Technical Sales and Solutions Engineer at Panasonic, he has a demo outside for anyone who wants to see this afterwards. And Matt Furlow, who's the Director of Policy at CTEC, the U.S. Chamber Technology Engagement Center. So thanks to all of you for being here today. To start off, I want us to spend some time talking about what some of the most interesting commercial uses of facial recognition technology that you're seeing out there today. As I mentioned, it seems like we're seeing more and more of this. I want to spend some time kind of laying the groundwork for what you're excited about in this space and where you see interesting applications. So, Jake, let me start with you.
Sure. So, I guess just to explain who the Security Industry Association is, we represent about 1,000 companies that are involved in all different aspects of physical security, electronic security. And so I guess in our world, we're definitely seeing in the commercial space a way for facial recognition to be used to improve access control applications, so security for buildings in campuses. It solves some of the problems that occur in that space. So one example would be for the need for multi-factor authentication. If your access to a building is simply with a key fob, obviously those things can be lost or shared or stolen. Providing a second factor of authentication to make sure the person is who they say they are and is authorized to enter. Also takes care of some problems like piggybacking, where you've got someone who holds the door open for someone behind them, someone else comes in with them that's not supposed to. But we've also it's seen a lot of applications in video surveillance as well, as an enhancement to the security of a facility. So.
Jamie, so as I mentioned, you're with Consumer Technology Association. Every time I get a chance to go to CES, it's just a delight to see all the new technology, all the new innovations. And I know facial recognition is a big part of that. It's going to be a big part of CES.
Yeah, absolutely. CES, January 7th to 10th. So if you haven't been out before, highly encourage you to go. All the coolest technologies, yes, and facial recognition technology is something that we've seen a lot over the past couple of years from exhibitors. And this year, we're actually debuting it as a trial for badge pickup. So it's an opt-in, an optional way to go and get your badge for CES, where, instead of having to stand in line and pull out your ID or a QR code, you can just walk up and it'll match your face with the picture that you submit for your badge. And we're really hoping that will be a good, one test case just to get that technology out there for people to experience it and see what the feedback is and how they feel about it. But two, this is such a great technology for removing pain points in our lives. I hate standing in line. I'm sure everybody hates standing in line. Anything we can do to make that experience better and get people into the things they want to do, whether it's walking around CES or getting on an airplane and travel. This is a great tool to be able to do that. And we're obviously we've seen a lot with the airlines was starting to use this. Delta, I think in Atlanta, has a whole area that they're dedicating to using facial recognition to check in for your flights. I think you'll see a lot more of it as well on the hospitality side, checking in for your room. At a hotel could be a lot easier, and again, we eliminate that line and that pain point. It just makes your day faster and better.
Yeah, I think that's what's just really an exciting opportunity in this space is that we're seeing it deployed in more and more areas. So, I mean, David, you're with one of the companies that is making facial recognition technology. You have a lot of customers out there in different industries. What industries are you seeing starting to use this?
Yeah, I think to piggyback on what Jake and Jamie said, there's a lot of applications. A lot of them are these convenience applications that Jamie mentioned. A lot of security that Jake mentioned. I think the biggest that we've seen, well, historically, biometrics and facial recognition has been a very government-centric solution. It's been used by the military and law enforcement for over a decade at this point. But we're seeing it really move into the private sector. In the last couple of years, the biggest adopters have been finance and banking. So we power about half of the identity proofing industry, which is a solution where you can prove you are who you say you are when you do online transactions, open accounts, do banking online. And it's essentially take a picture of your driver's license, take a selfie, validate that the driver's license is real and that the selfie matches the driver's license photo. And that's been huge for both security and convenience. That's probably the biggest early adoption. So it's finance and anti-spoofing, anti-fraud. But we're seeing also in access control, so smart door locks, smart gates, people being able to gain entry into buildings. And then there's a ton of interest from a lot of different industries to do novel things. So schools, hospitals, venues and stadiums, automotive, consumer electronics. It's a lot of really interesting applications, as well as some retail applications, primarily based on analyzing demographics of who is my customer base. Do this certain age range prefer this type of live experience? It's not to the identity level, and I don't know that it'll get there, but we can pick that up later in the conversation.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about some of the school applications that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's driven, frankly, by school shootings. It's a sad fact of American life is that our schools are a weak point, and schools already have existing. We call them dumb cameras. They're not AI enabled. They're not biometrics or facial recognition enabled. But they have cameras at every door, and before you can gain entry into a school, you have to present yourself and then be buzzed in by a receptionist. So there's interest in adding facial recognition to those existing systems to enable whitelisting of these are the students and faculty and employees that are allowed on campus, as well as blacklisting of this is a student that we're concerned about. And there's also integration into surveillance systems as well for pairing face recognition with weapons detection, which is a very early stage technology. But there's we've seen a lot of interest in that.
Yeah. Please, Mel.
Yeah, and kind of to continue on that from our side, what we've been seeing and starting to deploy are things in assisted living or managed care facilities. the healthcare environment, hospitals, things of this sort. We see them going into retail as well, and then and even in the factory environment, we have a lot of interest from some large manufacturing companies to do things like again in just enhancing their physical security. So as Panasonic, we've been involved in the physical security and cameras technology since the 50s. So everybody's been watching and recording and going back and looking for incidents or things that have happened or monitoring live. And now it's the thing of maybe adding this facial recognition to this to make searching easier. So being able to say, hey, I had an incident happen. This is who we feel it was. I can go back and search the database, not just for the time it happened, but I can search for when that incident happened for maybe that person, or they entered this door. How do we know what's going on? So I can make my searching for incidences much quicker this way as well. But then also taking on the point of whitelisting or blacklisting or what we would call known person or unknown person. I have an ex-employee. This is what we're hearing from a lot of the retail and manufacturing, some of these places, corporate environment, is we want to know when that ex-employee that got let go or fired or for whatever happened, if they enter one of our facilities, we'd like to know that they're entering the facility. It could be no big deal. It couldn't, but at least they get an alert that, hey, Mel's back on the facility, and they, oh yeah, he's supposed to be here because he's filling this out or doing this. But if an incident is going to happen, they could be a little bit more alerted and pay more attention to what's been going on with that with an incident at this time. Some of the assisted living we're seeing, or the managed care, are for wandering. We've started doing a lot with assisted living, and one of their things is managing the folks that are there and having them walk and leave the facility without known. Now, there's a lot of things we're doing with badging or things of that, but the badge can fall off. The batteries or whatever could be weak on that. They still can get out. Well, if I have a second tier, being a facial recognition, when they start to walk toward the doors, either the door locks or we're alerted, somebody knows that person is walking out of the facility. So we're seeing a lot of interest there. We've started deploying actually in a couple of environments for that. That is there. And that brings up another system, which I think we're going to talk about later, but now how do we manage things like HIPAA compliance or privacy for these folks? And we're building a lot of that into the way the product is, and I'll talk about that maybe in a little bit as well. But we also, again, those are some of our concerns as the manufacturing. How do we address concerns with things like the privacies, or how do we comply, especially in the healthcare environment, with like HIPAA laws or GDPR and things of that sort. So,
thanks. And Matt, so Chamber, I know, has been thinking a lot about facial recognition, probably because it's one of these technologies that's just so pervasive. It's really affecting every industry. Where are you seeing the compelling use cases?
Yeah, so the Chamber, we have about 3 million members from all across the country, and we cross quite a few industries. So quite a few of our members from a very diverse set of industries are using facial recognition or is interested in using facial recognition. A lot of which were mentioned earlier. I think one of the main use cases now is the security authentication. So what Visa and MasterCard is using, what Chase is using to allow you to access your bank account. And I think moving forward, you're going to see a lot of it. The major trend is going to be in the retail space and improving the customer experience, because right now we're seeing a move towards more of a personalized customer experience where someone could, instead of having the manager go up and say, oh, you're Joe Schmo, you've been at this hotel for 50 times the past year, you can have an automated detection of that individual and identify that and immediately provide those benefits, which is more efficient and a little more seamless. I think that's really where we're seeing it right now.
Yeah. And Mel, so we've started talking about all these really interesting opportunities and areas where it's being deployed. And one of the questions that I often have people ask is, why is this happening now? We've had cameras before, we've had computers before. Why is facial recognition have such a big issue right now?
So on the issues, that I think it really comes down to the technology is getting that much better. Camera technology is better. We have a lot higher resolution cameras. We're able to manage the data as well, because as my camera technology and the resolution goes up, obviously I have all this data now that is now to be transferred on networks or things of that sort. And I think it's also helping that we're able to do a lot more compression. The transmission of these images is that much better this day, or the information. And then again, the technology for the quality of the image we're getting, the accuracy is that much better. Knowing who this person is, knowing that it's me every time is real important, that we don't make mistakes and that there are things there. So I think the technology itself, as the imaging is getting better, that's what's bringing a lot more of this to the forefront.
Yeah. I mean, I know reading some of the older reports, there were issues before about, if you're capturing an image from the side, for example, versus direct on. I mean, there was some facial recognition that worked really well in this kind of ideal perfect lab scenario. Seems like we've managed to solve a lot of those problems, so it works in the real world scenarios. Jake, did you want me to?
That is exactly it. As we go in, and as again, that's part of that technology. So not only is the camera getting better, but the algorithms and the information we're using to gather the points of what a face is. Because that's what we do. Is it's not things like color and skins or things of that sort. It's really points on the face, noses, eyes, facial features that we can get a lot more information from and take that data to then search against on there at this point.
And I'll jump in as well. I think to Mel's point, the data quality has gotten a lot better, a lot more available. But a big part of the story has been the rise of deep learning and convolutional neural networks that have taken us from handcrafted pattern solutions to now fully automated machine learning solutions that are amazing. And they're also through leadership of a lot of the tech giants that have made available these deep learning frameworks. They've really democratized all of biometrics as well as facial recognition. So that's driven a huge improvement in the technology over the last few years. Between 2006 and 2017, there's been a 1,000 times reduction in error rates. So the accuracy has improved from where NIST was testing 1 in 1,000 false accept, and now 10 years later they're testing 1 in 1,000,000, and at the same false reject rate. It's continued to improve even since 2017. And to Mel's point, faces in the wild have gone from pretty egregious error rates of 60-70% down to less than 5%, sometimes nearing 1% today, and that's happened all in the last 4 years. So that's why we're seeing sudden interest from all over, especially all over the private sector, and these, especially Jamie's novel applications. Our face recognition has arrived. It's now extremely accurate across all demographics, across all use cases. Whereas the ancient history at this point was frontal constrained passport photos, basically, where you have consistent lighting, consistent background, single camera, trained photographer, and now it can work on faces in the wild with 95+% accuracy.
And I'll just add in, as a result of the advances that Dave just mentioned, the technology has become much more affordable, and so that's another reason why we're seeing more interest now. There's been more actually competition in the space because of the democratization of it. And also there's some natural advantages over other types of biometrics. I think that they're at play too. You have a touchless interface. There's generally much faster processing times. So there's some natural advantages that work into it.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if you could talk a little bit more about that, because Jake, with SIA, you've seen the industry itself evolve, and I think gravitate even more towards facial recognition in recent years in terms of, just the number of vendors that are using it, and how they're using that as the kind of go-to biometric in a lot of cases rather than other solutions. Just wondering if you could kind of comment on that.
I think so, part of that is also that now this can work to some extent over an existing infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to, it runs largely on software. You don't have to incorporate new hardware in a lot of ways, in a lot of situations with it. So
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
I'll jump in one more time. Another change has been moving to faster algorithms and smaller template size. So the historical application, is military and law enforcement, where speed is not an issue. You can run it on huge server clusters. The only goal is accuracy. And it's not really, you're not trying to run on video. You're not trying to run in real time. Rank 1 really pioneered the small template size, and we are the smallest and one of the fastest solutions that submit to NIST. And today a template, which is the mathematical representation of a face, fits into 165 bytes. So you can fit 10 million faces into 1.65 gigabytes, which fits into standard RAM sizes for commodity equipment, to Jake's point. And as far as speed, we operate at 5 frames per second on a server and about 1 frame per second on mobile devices. So these kind of CES, cutting edge, small ARM equipment devices can now utilize face recognition without, an obscene delay. And that's been another major improvement in making technology feasible.
I'm just kind of blown away by 165 bytes. I mean, that's incredible. And I mean, obviously, we're seeing the evolution of mobile networks where that capacity is going to increase, but I mean, 165 bytes is nothing. So maybe I'll actually open this up to whoever wants to take it, maybe Jamie. I want to talk a little bit about kind of where the technology is going. I mean, we've seen this rapid evolution, and it doesn't look like it's stopping. So what's kind of the future of this technology? Is the technology changing? Are the applications going to change? What should we expect in the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure, yeah, I think definitely the applications are just going to continue to expand. Mel talked a little bit about the health and assisted living, and I think that's going to be a huge benefit because think about like Alzheimer's patients, think about people that maybe have vision impaired problems that this could be really helpful for and not only making their lives easier, but making them more comfortable and have a better quality of life because there's less confusion and there's a tool out there to help them. So I think that health applications are really just going to continue to grow and expand. You mentioned the vehicles with BMW recognizing that that's your car. Well, when we get to the point of having, truly autonomous vehicles, you're not going to have anyone in the car when you have, your Uber is coming up to pick you up. How do you make sure you're getting in the right Uber? How does the Uber make sure that you're the right person getting in the car? Facial recognition is a pretty easy solution for that. So a lot of those things, I think, as other technologies continue to develop, this is something that can be incorporated in that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if I could say that as well, Mark had mentioned too a lot of the what I would call VIP experience. So I think that's where I see some of this kind of could go as well. Is that VIP experience in the hospitality environment? That guest that's always checking in the hotel. That we now know that Mr. Jones came in. Here we are, and we go forward and how we treat him. The auto companies, dealerships, and things like that have recurring purchases of vehicles. The auto company would know, hey, we know what's going on. This is Jim coming in. He's been here. He's going to, you're ready to trade in your car you bought. Great. Here we can go. We can make that experience. So I think in the consumer environment, some of the consumer experience as a VIP could be used for this technology as well.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that. Especially, I think one of the ones that I'm looking forward to seeing is the airline lounges, where you go in and it's a mass of people that all got off the same plane, and you only have an hour, but you're spending 20 minutes checking in there when there's really no reason. The airlines already have the information about you. Matt, I suppose you guys are thinking about this as well.
Yeah, and actually, the airline one. Earlier today, I was at the airport council had a conference, their international policy conference, and one of the topics was biometrics. And there was a guy from the Miami airport up there, and he was talking about how they are using facial recognition to cut down wait times for boarding by about 50%, which is very significant. So I think going back to what Jamie said earlier in the panel, just kind of making everyone a little more at ease when they travel, or anything to kind of make it more seamless, to be more widely used. But I think it's hard to envision applications for a technology like facial recognition, but I think a good rule of thumb is if you need it for some sort of authentication, then facial recognition could be a solution.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on kind of the future in this space?
One other thing I forgot to mention, a cool application that I just saw the other day, I was reading about the other day, is the National Soccer Hall of Fame in Dallas. It uses facial recognition. It's optional, of course, if you want to use it, but it totally customizes your experience through the museum. They've kind of partnered that along with some AR, VR experiences. So, when you're going through and if you have, a favorite soccer player, you can, hear their story and things that are specific to you. So that kind of like individual customization, not just for retail, but for, for museums and learning experiences is another application that just, I hadn't thought of before, but I found really compelling and really interesting.
Right. Jake, I wonder if you could just mention also as the technology advances, there's always people that are trying to attack the technology as well, especially when we're talking about security applications. I remember with the first fingerprint readers, there was, for some of these you could go and, put like a balloon or a piece of putty on top of it. It would pick up the prior thumbprint and automatically kind of let you in. And there are these types of hacks. And with facial recognition, people, of course, have tried to do different things. And the technology has pretty much kept up with this. Do you see any evolution in terms of how the technology is staying ahead of potential attacks on the facial recognition itself?
Yeah. So I know, and actually the industry folks here might be able to answer this better than me, but certainly there's ways around, like you've heard stories about people just using a photograph to get past the system. I know there's liveness detection technology. I think there's other things as well that are being worked on in that space to address the being able to use someone else's identity in that way.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So liveness is probably the hardest problem that's still facing facial recognition, is proving that this is a real live human being standing in front of a camera as opposed to a replay image on someone's phone or someone holding a printed photograph. And that's got a little ways to go. We have a solution. So there's two different ways to do liveness. One is called active liveness, where you basically do Simon Says plus a computer and instruct the user to do something. Blink twice, open your mouth, turn left, turn right. If they perform all your instructions, then they're obviously responding to the instructions. That impacts the user experience, and people don't like to have to do something beyond just look at it and have it work. So the goal is to develop passive liveness solutions where the user doesn't have to do anything, and we can know that it's a real live person. We have a passive liveness solution that operates on an uncompressed image and then looks for compression artifacts, relying on the fact that 99% of images are stored as JPEGs or some other compressed file format. And so we're looking for those compression artifacts, glare off of a phone, things like that. There are other solutions that involve depth of field. So, if there's a three-dimensionality to the face, then it's probably a real face. If there's not, and it's a flat 2D representation. And then there are also video-based solutions that are worth exploring. But it's an area of active research for the industry.
Yeah. Mel, any thoughts?
Right, and I would say I agree, and a lot of that technology is things that we're all working on to get, how do we know what a live real person is? So a lot of what we've done as well is we're not promoting this as a single source, especially if you're using for access control or things of that sort. We would recommend using it as a dual authentication or a secondary, where you're using either a swipe card and the face, or you're using a keypad and the face, using multiple authentication type of environment. But it is something that is challenging. It does have a challenge for this market, is to get, how do we get away from, and how do we get to know that is a live person that we're dealing with, and how do we make the experience where you don't have to do the interact that much with it to make it harder to work. And that is being addressed and being looked at through all of the technology that's being created, I feel.
And will any of this, please, you can.
No, I was just going to add too. Obviously, the importance of this issue really does depend on the actual specific use of the technology is in what you're protecting. So it may be more or less important depending on what the application is.
I was just going to ask about the use of. I know some companies are trying to use the near infrared cameras, so not just the traditional image based, but they're using near infrared instead to kind of map the face. Is that something that will be on the future, or are we likely to see any kind of other changes in cameras?
So, yeah, definitely that is another way of doing face recognition. We definitely see that in the access control space, using infrared instead of a traditional photographic means. There's some advantages there and some disadvantages, and maybe you guys can explain that. But there is certainly that does certainly cut down on the spoofing risk.
Yeah. So the main advantage is you can control the lighting scenario. So that's essentially what the Apple iPhone Face ID solution is a 3D infrared camera with a 3D infrared dot projector, which is essentially a flash in the infrared spectrum. So there you can control both the hardware and the lighting to have a very consistent representation. The challenge is that you have to put a 3D infrared sensor and a 3D dot projector, infrared dot projector, into every device, and so it's a cost trade-off that can make sense in certain applications, and did for Apple. I think to Mel's point, we're going to see a lot more multi-factor solutions. So we actually have a solution with a partner company that uses face recognition and iris technology that is faster, cheaper than the Face ID unlock technology, and is available for use with existing 2D cameras, as opposed to needing to develop something around infrared. But that's the big trade-off. And I think to Mel's point, in all of privacy and security, it's what you have, and who you are the three major prongs. And so if we can move to multi-factor biometrics, that's multiple features of who you are. If you have an ID card or a cell phone token, that's what you have. And then traditional password is what you know. And I think we are going to move to that as a society, because it's easy to defeat any one prong, but it's really hard to defeat multiple prongs that are orthogonal to one another.
So Matt, I know CTEC this morning just put out this new set of principles for thinking about facial recognition, and that's where I kind of wanted us to move the conversation now, is how the private sector is thinking about safeguarding privacy and security, and just thinking about its relationship with customers. And all these applications we're talking about in the commercial space, it's a company with a relationship with their customers, and so they're obviously not trying to deploy this technology in ways that are going to leave them with dissatisfied customers. So how are you guys thinking about these principles? I thought they were really interesting that you put out.
Thank you. And yeah, so this morning we released our 7 principles on facial recognition that we gathered input from about 24 or so of our member companies, spanning airlines, retail, vendors, so a very wide spectrum of both users and vendors of the technology. We have 7 in total. I don't need to go through all of them, of course, but I think a couple of the key ones is, first, number one, transparency has to be the cornerstone. Transparency on use, transparency on how you're using the data, how it's being stored, how it's being transferred, et cetera. And that's a very similar parallel that we're seeing with the data privacy debate as well. Mm-hmm. In addition, privacy and cyber protections also need to be important. It is fairly high-risk data. Facial data is very unique. So both vendors and users need to be sure it's protected. And I think one other really key factor is that we really need to have a single federal framework for facial recognition. We're seeing all these bans crop up in Somerville, Massachusetts, San Francisco. We're seeing one potentially in Massachusetts, and we really have a consistent policy across the country. So that's probably going to be one of our top priorities moving forward, to help kind of move that forward in a responsible way. And none of our members, and nor do us, we want to see this technology succeed, but we also want to be sure that it's safe. And and I think no one wants to sell or use faulty technology. I think we all have a commitment to make sure it works, it protects consumers, and protects the public as a whole.
Yeah. Jamie, can I ask you to weigh in on that as well? Because I know CTA thinks a lot about basically how do we get technology to the masses, how do we make it work? What are you thinking around these issues around privacy and security, even when you're rolling this out at CES?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were talking about testing this out at CES, kind of our first couple questions were, all right, how do we make sure that our guests are notified of it, know that it's an option? How do we get them the information in the way that is easily digestible, and explain to them what it is and how it's working, and if they have other questions, how can we answer them? We're doing this in a way, and the company that we're partnering with is doing it in a way that, we only have the data we only have the images for about 30 minutes. We're not keeping anything. It's, wiped every half hour or so. To give that assurance that this is what we're using it for, and this is the only thing we're using it for. We're not hanging on to it for any other reason, and that's important for I think for the experience and for consumers and for our guests to feel comfortable with it, but also from the security standpoint as well. Because when you're, like Matt said, when you're looking at facial or you're thinking about biometrics, it is very sensitive data, and that's something that our members will, and Matt's members and all these companies will continue to think about is the prioritization of keeping it secure. Because, as Matt said, you can't change your face, you can change your documents, you can change your password, but I think there's a very high level of awareness of what the extra sensitivities and concerns are for consumers, and wanting to make sure that we're addressing that, but also dealing with making sure that there's an understanding of what it really is, that there's no confusion in how it works and what the risks really are or aren't. I think those conversations need to continue to happen, and the more consumers, as with any technology, interact with technology, they have a better understanding of it, and they're generally more comfortable with it.
Yeah. Jake, anything from the security industry in terms of how you're thinking about those privacy and security concerns?
Yeah, I think so. And one point to make is that there is a lot of really good privacy protective practices that are implemented when these systems are put into place. I think we can definitely do a better job as an industry in helping the end users with that process, and I think that's something that we're being asked now to help assist with. I think, but as far as rules we're talking about here, I think that it makes sense. Commercial use makes sense to establish those rules in the context of this national data privacy framework that we've been hearing about, especially lately with the introduction of several data privacy proposals in the U.S. Congress, and I think it makes sense within that context.
Yeah, and so I'll open this up to whoever wants to take it. You mentioned these federal privacy laws. I guess the question I have is, what are the privacy concerns of the biometric data itself? As you mentioned, Jamie, you can't change your face. Your face also isn't private for the most part, right? I mean, most people walk around in public places, their image can be captured. It's not private the way that a password's private or something else like that is sensitive health information, for example, is private in a way that a face just is different. You might still think it's important, but it doesn't have that same level of privacy. So, for example, if we were to see a data breach of, the either images or face prints, what is the actual risk to consumers? Because, as we were talking about earlier, the way the technology is being deployed, it's using liveness, it's using other means to actually detect when somebody is present in front of a camera. So what use is a face print? What's the risk there, and how are companies thinking about managing those risks? David.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something that's really important, which is a face is fundamentally different than a fingerprint or an iris or even your voice. It's a public biometric where, in ignoring the technology, if you walk into a bank with a ski mask on, you're not welcome in that bank. If we were up here presenting and covering our faces, it would be highly unusual. In fact, it's illegal to go out in public in France with your face covered for various reasons. So it's fundamentally a public biometric, whereas your fingerprint, you have to actively present it. Same thing with iris, same thing with your voice even. You have to speak in order for that to be recorded. And I think that there's two questions there. One is that systems need to be developed that acknowledge that faces are fundamentally more public than these other solutions, these other biometrics, and should not be the end-all be-all for security, because your face is out there. It's on Facebook, and it has been data mined by foreign actors that have the images of every American that they want. So we cannot build solutions that are primarily and solely dependent on face. If you want a hardened security environment. And the second question, I think, is how do you regulate that and regulate the storage of data? So the primary data is the image. It's not the template, which is a mathematical representation of the image. It's mathematical analysis of that image. The primary data is the image itself. Similar to with a fingerprint, it's the fingerprint, not the template that's generated from that. And I think a lot of the regulation has focused on storage of templates, but frankly, we release new versions every 4 months. I'm sure Panasonic and all of our competitors do the same. Those versions are not compatible with one another. So the template is frankly pretty ephemeral. It's useful for that exact version of the application or of the algorithm, and it has nothing to do with the fundamental personhood of that individual. But we do need to focus, I think, on how the fundamental data is stored and safeguarded. And as we're designing systems, there needs to be an awareness that most of that data is already lost through our friend Facebook, frankly.
And Mel, could you weigh in on that? Because David, I just want to really emphasize that point. I want to see if Mel agrees as well. We are seeing federal legislation and other bills as well that are very specifically calling out face prints as sensitive data. So, reserving the highest level of protections. Again, not the images, but the face prints, which, as you pointed out, are basically proprietary information to a specific system, a specific implementation of the system.
Right.
And Mel, is that your take as well?
I would agree. How the data patterns or the things that are used other than the actual physical picture itself is proprietary to each of the individual systems. So if I have that information from our particular solution on the Panasonic side and try to take it into someone else's or try to use that across platforms, it doesn't work. It doesn't matter if what I've got in that, and most of that is then built into the core of on the servers of the products that are actually doing the analytics on the face prints we have. Now the face prints themselves, thinking or having that be a concern, there are things that we're doing on the manufacturing side and on the product development side to alleviate that from getting out. So we'll do things like we build in automatic deletion of the images after a certain point if you want. They can be saved forever. They can be deleted after up to any certain point. So we'll save them and destroy that information, that data we've collected on that person after any particular point. So I can save these thumbnails or not, or put a retention period on them. We also encrypt that information. So I have the ability to take and actually encrypt that data just like I do encrypting data information for banking or whatever, where I actually encrypt those faces, images. So if they do get out, if you can't decrypt them, you don't have access to the actual face images as well. With that system as well. The other thing we're doing is we're actually logging every transaction that happens on these systems. So as someone goes in, and if I go into the system to work on it, or to pull faces out, or to delete, I actually have a audit trail of what was done on our particular system, so I can go back if a data breach happened, or if something. Okay, what did happen? When did it happen? What was going on at the time that these things went on? So I'm logging all of this that's going on with our systems as well to again ensure we can either know what happened, where it was, what was released, or have the ability to say, hey, this was stopped because of these safeguards that were put in place within the solution.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to add too. So this is unfortunately one of the symptoms of the media being saturated with misinformation about facial recognition. But you often hear the concern that, well, if your template is compromised and it can be used in other systems to track your movements and things like that, and that's just, as you were explaining, that's just not how it works. It's a proprietary thing. But also, you can't actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't actually take a template and reverse engineer a photo from it either.
Yeah, I was about to jump in on that. So they're currently non-invertible, which means you can go from an image of a person to a template, but you can't go from the template back to an image of that person. And the reason you can only fit so much information in 165 bytes, like it's roughly invertible. Like if using GANs, you can build a technology that would, if you have access to the algorithm that generated the template and the template itself, you can probably come up with, a picture of a white guy in his 30s if you had my template. But it's not going to match my face. And if you generated a new template from that image, it probably would not match, or it would not match at this point, my face. So that may be something that changes down the line. There's a constant cat and mouse game in terms of building technology and trying to defeat it. But at this point, it's non-invertible, and I don't think we have a projection on when that might change.
And so I think, additionally, the privacy issues come into play where that template or photo are connected with a person's other personally identifiable information, right?
So, the other concern that we hear a lot about is, in addition to privacy and security, we hear concerns about potential bias in the systems in terms of the accuracy when it's being applied to different demographics, particularly around race and gender. How is the private sector thinking about these types of concerns?
Yeah. So we as a company have a lot to say on this issue. The original study that is cited consistently for the presence of racial bias was written by our CEO and CTO together with Richard Vorderberge from the FBI. And that was in 2012. So that is 7 years ago, which is ancient history at this point in the technology. Since then, as I mentioned, the overall accuracy has improved 1,000-fold, and the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, puts together a ongoing monthly 600-page report benchmarking our technology, Panasonic's, and I think 170 other algorithms submitted worldwide. And it looks at this issue. It looks at gender and race bias. And the current state of the technology is it's actually more accurate on persons of color than it is on white persons. And that's for pretty much across the board for the top most accurate algorithms. There's some laggards as well. But that story is not being picked up. And it's a really important one to know is that the talking points are based on a 2012 study, and then it's also based on this MIT Media Lab gender shade study that looks at demographic labeling, which is fundamentally different from face recognition. So demographic labeling is looking at a picture of someone and saying, okay, let's make an age estimation, an ethnicity estimation, and do they have glasses on or not? Are they smiling? Are they not? It's not looking at who is the identity of this person. And those are fundamentally different problems where you're training an algorithm to recognize race as opposed to recognize identity. They're somewhat similar because in order to recognize who a person is, you often, humans do this as well in human face recognition is first categorize, all right, male or female, rough age range, ethnicity, and then start to hone in on, in like a guess who sort of manner, who is this person. And in automated face recognition, you can kind of backtrack from the template to try to identify some of those characteristics. But they're fundamentally different problems, and demographic labeling is being cited for facial recognition performance. Not to mention that study is also extremely old. But as far as what is the industry doing about it, I think another talking point you get is that these are technologies that are developed by white males, so they must be using training data that only includes white males. And I can assure you that's not true for us or Panasonic or anyone else in the industry. The goal is to develop an accurate algorithm across all demographics, across all sub populations, and we work very hard to develop curate that training data to represent the world's population and every subdemographic possible, and we test and evaluate our research based on those subdemographics. Is there anything I missed in that question?
I think I got to a lot of it. I'd love to hear other reactions, Mel. Certainly, how your company's thinking about it, but also Matt, it sounds like you want to weigh in.
Okay, yeah, we're taking that as very serious as well. And some things that we've done is because, again, we're creating a facial recognition system, and one of the ways that we're looking to deploy and to work with the system is looking at it again from the security standpoint in a lot of ways. So what we've done, and one thing is we don't look at a lot of these images as whether it is a white person, a black person, an Asian person. We don't look at those types of demographics across the face. We're looking at more key points on the face of what a face is and what makes up that as someone's face to then make it recognizable to match against the pictures and the images we create. So this way, I don't really care what the ethnicity of this particular individual is, but I care about the characteristics that make up the face, and that has actually been able to help us keep a very accurate acceptance rate of when I want to recognize a face, or I want to take an alert off of a face that comes in contact with my camera, to where my accuracy is close to being spot on in a lot of ways, because the data I've collected is looking at points of what makes up the characteristics of that face. And we've done both in clinical environments that we're doing this and getting very good results, but we also then put this in the field actually to a live environment where we've got it actually in a spot where there's been over 65,000 faces that interact with the system at any one time, from a wide variety of ethnic backgrounds, whites and African Americans and Hispanics and Asians, and in this particular environment, we're seeing a less than a 0.005 failure rate on recognizing the proper face when they come in contact with this across all demographics. So that's the things that we're working with to make sure and try to make this, to take that there is no racial bias per se on this type of technology that we're deploying.
Thank you. I think one other thing from a kind of an industry-wide standpoint, and one of our principles is we are advocating for the creation of performance-based standards that are industry-driven, to kind of address this issue too, because not all facial recognition technologies do meet that. Quite a few do, as you know, and they are rapidly improving. But I think that should help at least bring a little more trust into the system, because that's kind of that's why we're seeing such a backlash that we're seeing right now. We think that Congress has a very good, important role to play in this.
Jamie or Jake, I just wanted to see if you had anything else to weigh in on this.
Sure. Just picking up on what Mel said, I think you mentioned that I think is really important is the accuracy level, and what as the end user that is deploying this technology, is what level of accuracy do you set it to? Do you, is 80% okay? Probably not for sensitive and important decision making. You probably want to be closer to 90, 95%. So I think that's something that, as industry, sells or deploys this technology, making sure that, the end user has a good understanding of what that setting and what that scale means is probably something that would be really helpful in also addressing that issue.
Mm-hmm. So Jake, let me maybe turn a different question to you, unless you want to weigh in on that specifically.
Well, I would just say real quickly. So I mean, the consistency and performance across demographic groups obviously is a big goal, of the industry, and concerns about inconsistent performance is a legitimate concern, to be sure. But as David pointed out, I completely agree with you. The assertion that there's an inherent bias in the technology is certainly based on very flimsy evidence. And but even setting that aside, okay, so it depends on the importance of this issue depends on the context. So if there's any statistical inconsistency across demographic groups, which is bias in the scientific jargon, where the assumption that automatically results in discrimination against people, it's ludicrous. So it doesn't work that way in law enforcement, but even out in the law enforcement case, you're dealing with potential use as a tool that will, informs at least arrest decisions and things like that, which are very high consequence events. So if you look at it in the commercial sector and the private sector, Let's say one user goes through an access control point, and out of 100 times, it doesn't work 5 times. Okay, another individual goes through, and out of 100 times, it only fails to work 2 times, and maybe they have to align a little bit better to get in. That's not the same kind of consequence. I'm just pointing out there's a difference in the implications of when the technology doesn't work as it's intended.
Yeah. So one of the other questions I wanted to bring up, this has come up in a few different forums, is what responsibility should the facial recognition technology companies have for how their technology is being used? So this has come up in questions about who the business customers should be. This has come up in questions about whether the U.S. should have some kind of export controls on this technology. This has come up with the State Department looking at creating guidelines for the use of what they're calling surveillance technology, which included in their definition their facial recognition. Where should that responsibility lie? And Jake, if you want to take that, and I'll just open it up to the rest of the panel.
Sure. So something our industry's obviously been watching very closely is what's going on in China, the concerns about Chinese use of all different kinds of technology, facial recognition included, in ways that are inappropriate and discriminatory against the minority groups over there. We have a lot of concern here, especially in Congress, with that. And I think it is really important that the manufacturers do have a responsibility to help ensure that their products are used in beneficial ways and not harmful ways, and they don't have complete control over that. But we have been working with the State Department process as far as coming up with some export guidelines for U.S. companies in that regard, and is supportive of that process. There's also something that's called the Copenhagen Letter, which deals with responsible use of technology, is originated in Europe, obviously, that SIA has just signed on to, and encourage our members to sign on to that as well, making a pledge that you'll take steps to make sure your products are used responsibly.
Other thoughts?
I think as you're developing a regulatory scheme, I think it's important to notice that there are 4 different groups of players involved. So there's the algorithm developer that's essentially building a code library that says, when you give me an image, detect a face. Once you've detected a face, generate a template, and then be able to compare the two templates and return a match score. And that is a code library like any other open source library that gets incorporated into other computer software code into a system. And the entity that does that is the system developer. So that's the one that's using the code library to build, take the image from the camera and generate a template and then do this and then open the door or provide access to the banking records and they actually design how the data is going to be housed and collected and stored and deleted. There's, the rest of the software design problem is done by the system developer. Then there's the system user, which may not be the same entity. Someone may license in Microsoft Word and then they're the system user. Or maybe a better example is the company licenses Microsoft Word, and then the individual sitting at the computer is the end user who's actually interfacing with the technology. In this case, the end user is the person whose face is presumably being captured in an image and then trying to access that system. So from an incidence of responsibility standpoint, I think there are 2 major locuses that we can put that responsibility. One is on the system user, as far as the who is actually collecting that data, and where is their responsibility to delete it, to collect it in a safe way, to transfer it in safe ways, encrypt everything. And the other is the system developer, who is developing the system for how, the framework and architecture for how that data is going to be handled. The algorithm developer it really doesn't interface with any of that architecture, any of the storage side, any of the database side, and other than contractual requirements, is going to be pretty hindered from a technical standpoint in doing anything to actually introduce safety into the system. That said, we as an algorithm developer think that there's been an absence of regulatory action. So our contract specifies, comply with all applicable law everywhere in the world, which includes a number of biometric laws here in the U.S. as well as in Europe. But we've gone a little further, and we've introduced a code of ethics for how, when we play that system developer role, how we will develop systems and how we will require our partners to develop systems and use those systems. And that's actually not that hard. It's we think that most of the commercial issues boil down to some of the typical privacy issues that are dealt with in GDPR, especially individualized consent, and then all of the other pieces of storage and transfer and purpose for the data. But we think that in this use case, consent is critical, and there's already a Senate bill that proposes how to govern facial recognition, putting consent at the forefront with a carve-out where only notice is required for safety and security applications. And we think that makes a lot of sense. We're not policy experts, but that's our 2 cents.
Please, Jamie.
Yeah, when we think about this from a policy perspective in particular, I think it's really important to keep in mind that facial recognition is a technology and it is a tool that, similar to any other technology or tool, can be used for good purposes or for harmful or negative purposes. And as as new technologies come into the marketplace, there's sometimes a level of uncertainty and fear. When cell phones got cameras, I think there initially was concern about what that would do to your privacy or mean for people's privacy, and freaked out for a little bit. And then, there was a little bit of a rush to regulate, and then as people got more comfortable with it, that kind of died down. We've seen that with drones. Where there was kind of this rush, like, oh my gosh, all these drones that people are going to have, what are we going to do about your privacy there? Is that going to impact, are people going to be looking in my windows? Let's hurry up and legislate on it. And that a drone is a tool, facial recognition is a tool. I think it's really important to be careful when we're making public policy decisions that you're focused on the action and the user and what the use is, rather than just regulating the tool because it's a tool. Because one, technology changes all the time, it evolves all the time. If you legislate or regulate toward a very particular technology, it's likely going to be outdated very quickly. You need to think about things in a way that is keeping in mind what the actual problems are you're trying to solve and what you're trying to prevent. And the best way to do that being addressing the action rather than the particular technology.
Right. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one great example. I mean, we really do need to differ and kind of change our policy based on use case. I think one great example is Senator Coons and Senator Lee recently introduced legislation that would essentially disallow kind of so-called mass facial recognition by the federal government for, under quite a few circumstances when it would require a warrant to do so. It's a very narrowly tailored bill that addresses a key problem which a lot of the folks who are concerned about mass surveillance have. So I think that's one pretty good approach to take, is kind of taking a very narrow concern, as Jamie mentioned, and focusing just on that rather than a blanket ban or a moratorium.
Thanks. Mel, did you want to weigh in on the exports or anything?
Yeah, and on the from our side of things in dealing with this as the provider of the solution as well as developing it, it's hard for any single company, organization, or company to say how their technology is being used by any individual. We could sell something, but how it's going to be used by that person or that environment is totally. We have a hard time controlling those types would definitely have trouble controlling those types of events. But what we can do is we can actually create our policies of how we sell, what we sell, to follow like the U.S. guidelines for export, to exportation of technologies like this to regimes or areas or things that it's not supposed to. We don't want that to get into. So we definitely will work on our side to where and how this technology gets out and how it's being deployed is done in a manner that is follows the laws and policies that have been generated as well throughout the time. And then we also feel getting involved with companies like Jake's, SIA, and being part of that from our side of helping drive some of the policies and work with you to where these policies will be created to help ensure this technology doesn't get totally banned, but also can work well for society and for the environments.
Yeah, thanks. And Matt, I wanted to come back to you again too, because you had mentioned earlier some of the federal privacy laws that are being discussed right now, and again, we're seeing biometrics being brought into that, and some of it might have rules that make sense, and some of those rules might not make sense. David mentioned consent. There's also questions about access and correction to data. There's access, requirements about notification. What do you think makes sense to include if facial recognition gets wrapped up into a federal privacy bill? What makes sense to include in this space?
I think a couple of key areas include data deletion rights are important. Some degree of consent, I think we're still trying to weigh what degree is required. For example, if you have a facial recognition technology outside of a store, there are some challenges of how exactly do you obtain that consent. So I still think we're trying to weigh in that. But I think the key thing, going back to what I said earlier, is transparency. And that just doesn't apply to facial recognition, but applies across the board. And I think those should be some of the key pillars, how facial recognition should be used in privacy context.
Yeah. Jamie, any thoughts on this too? Because I know CTA has been pretty active in this space.
Yeah, sure. So Matt kind of alluded to this, but I think, as Congress considers a broader, baseline privacy security law, and as we've seen, with GDPR and different states, I think a lot of the concerns and the issues that, we have heard that relate specifically to facial recognition can be addressed by things that would be in the bill. As mentioned, the right of, access or correction or deletion, some of these things that we're considering for that broader bill would address a lot of these issues there. So I think it will naturally be a part of that conversation. Whether we need a specific call out for facial recognition technology in a privacy bill, I'm not so sure yet. As I mentioned before, we want to focus on what are the problems we're trying to fix, what are the concerns, and is there a reason that a broader baseline privacy bill wouldn't address that? Mm-hmm. If so, then okay, that's a separate conversation that we need to have. But my inclination is that a lot of these things will be covered by a baseline bill.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I want to open it up to questions from the audience. We have a mic. If you just raise your hand. Also, yes, please. If you're joining us online, if you want to submit a question to us via Twitter, you can use the hashtag ITIF facial recognition. Thanks. We can start here.
Thank you. Thanks for the whole panel. My name is Li Yang. I have no doubt that technology would improve all those facial recognition and their use. The problem now is for abuse or misconduct or conspiracy altogether, whether in the agencies or outside the agencies. So I just wonder, how do you improve this to promote the real efficiency and the use of technology and get rid of all those abuse and conspiracy, especially now, if you think about all those, lobby interest group, they roll over to the agency and put a spot for their people. And then you also have the PPP, public-private partnership. Now they use everything government power, they use their technology, and they take all the file, everything they have, so they can do everything possible. So they take advantage of people, taxpayer, everything. So if you have all this, and that means the taxpayer have to pay everything they can do, and an individual or family or small business, they have all the information they can steal.
I think we got the gist of the question. So I guess the question is, how is industry thinking about possible abuses and misuse, including by government? I'll open this up to whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah, I'll jump in on the government use and then turn it over to my fellow panelists for the commercial use. So a lot of the talking points are around real-time mass video watch listing, of saying you walk down the street, your face is captured on a surveillance camera, it's being searched against the database of all Americans or all Virginians, and they're tracking every movement. And that's not being done for two different reasons. One, police have really extensive procedures manuals that prohibit police from doing surveillance on Americans without a warrant at this point. So that's kind of out of my depth a little bit. But there's police are trustworthy in this country and work very hard and are subject to a lot of oversight. But the other thing I can speak more to is the technology, which is it's not there. Like, it's not accurate enough and it's not fast enough to do 1 to 100 million or 1 to 10 million real-time video watch listing in a lights-out manner, meaning no human in the loop, no involvement from a trained human facial examiner. And the reason for that is you have 10 million opportunities to get a false positive. And as you know from human face recognition, there are doppelgangers. Like, people mistake people that they think they recognize all the time. And the technology is going to do that as well. The automated technology is going to do that as well. And secondly, it's not fast enough. When you're doing 10 million comparisons in real time, it would require an extremely large server farm to do that. And so one, that's not happening. The way it is used by law enforcement today is very similar to a fingerprint analysis. So in fingerprint, suspect leaves a latent print at the crime scene. They dust for fingerprints, then send that latent print off to the FBI database to get what's called an investigative lead to see if they've recognized that person before. And then they start to build a case and start to investigate what was that person doing on that night. Similarly with automated facial recognition, either a bystander's cell phone or surveillance camera captures a picture, an image of the perpetrator leaving the crime scene. That image is then sent to a central crime lab within the organization. It's not done by the duty officer. It's done in a dedicated unit that has gotten a lot of training in how to do human facial examination and to do it not using our innate abilities, but they look at what are called morphological features, which is looking at very detailed differences, size of the nose, hairline differences, like, is this person's ear, does it match the person's ear in the picture? And the way it works is basically it's using the technology to take a haystack and then return a handful of needles to the trained human facial examiner, who then goes through one by one and makes a positive identification. So it's a human in the loop that's doing the identification, and it's for the purpose of generating an investigative lead, which is not supporting probable cause at this point, and we don't think it should at any point. We think that police need to do their work and build a case. But it has resulted in solving a lot of crime where, in the past, you had a blurry image of a guy getting out of an elevator, going, assaulting someone, and then leaving, and that crime just went to the whodunit file. Today, using automated face recognition, they're able to trim down, the list of every person that the police have ever arrested to, well, there's these 3 people that sort of are close. Let's start to look at those 3 people and see if one of them did it. And it solved thousands of crimes doing that. And that story is not getting enough awareness either, partly because police are very sensitive to publishing their success stories. I'll defer to the commercial side, but I will say that we've seen a lot of sensitivity around sharing data. So, for example, we develop the algorithm. We frequently help our customers integrate it, and then they run into issues, and we try to troubleshoot. And they say, yeah, we're enrolling this picture, and it's not working, or we're not getting the accuracy performance that we want with several pictures that are like this. And in order to troubleshoot, we generally need to see the picture to be able to diagnose what's going on. And we're running into a big challenge where our customers cannot and will not give us the image to even be able to troubleshoot to enable them to build a better system. And we're not looking for their whole database. We're looking for the one or two example problem images, and we're not even able to get that shared from our commercial providers. So I think industry is taking this very seriously, and it's not just because of the U.S. It's GDPR is now a reality in Europe, and we live in a global world. A lot of these companies serve the entire globe and are very sensitive to the European regulations. And I think, as has been mentioned, probably U.S. Privacy regulations are coming as well. So that's kind of the environment that we're experiencing. And I'll hand it over.
Pause there and see if there's other questions too, and we can come back.
Hi, Greg Nojak, Center for Democracy and Technology. Say you're exporting facial recognition technology to Egypt, for example, and you don't want it to be misused. What are the tools you could have in place to prevent that misuse? Could the tools include, for example, know your customer requirements, so that you have to know something about the entity you're selling to make sure they won't misuse it? Can they include things like we're going to not offer a service going forward if we learn about an abuse of our technology? Could they include things like licensing requirements so the license gets voided if they engage in a misuse that comes to your attention? What are your tools, and how will you deploy them?
Yeah, so one of the things that I see from our side, what we will do and what we can do is we move everything through a reseller channel or a channel. So we authorize, obviously, our resellers to sell, and we have a close partnership with our resellers between us and then the reseller channel by trainings and actually then licensing agreements with them to sell our products. So I think that's a lot of how we've done it. And on the U.S. side, obviously it's simple to say, hey, we're just not going to export into environments that we can't export into, and have that working relationship with the partners. But when it does come, because we're a worldwide company as well, we do have resellers in Egypt, in other locations, and really following the guidelines for obviously those countries and that as well. I know on the U.S. side, and our products right now are being developed with, and we provide a GDPR level of security and privacy that we're building, and we're using a lot of those regulations because that is a standard that's out there today for our product when in our development and the things we do. But then again, controlling the exploitation or the dealings with it, really through us, it's done through we manage that channel, and we manage that partner relationship with who sells our product, and work with them closely then on who they're selling to or how they sell the product. Now, does that mean we can be control of everybody and everyone that they are sold to? It can be tough to do, but yes, by canceling partnerships, in a lot of ways, if you find out about abuse or find out about things, is how that could be handled.
Other questions? Did you have one first? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I'm also a facial recognition provider, and Matt, I fully agree with you. Transparency is one of the greatest things that you can do if you're honest and put out with the customers. And then to follow your question is to put those procedures into your customers under the licensing agreements that restricts them from doing things. One of the things that we do is we make sure that we separate the face process from any other PII. So until you have a reason to put a person's PII in the system, whether they're an opt-in or they're an employee or they're a vendor or they've done something to you in the case of shoplifting, then you add the PII in a separate database. We give that database total control to the customer under their privacy rules. So now we can match all their privacy rules across their corporation and not keep that face. So it's, again, transparency, but building not only security, but this ability to keep the face different so it can't be searched. And again, the vectors can't be used again if you don't have the pictures. The other thing is time control. How long do you need to keep the pictures? We're deployed in the retail sector across multiple states in the country, and our policy, our starting policy and recommendation to our customers is no more than 10 days. If you have no reason to track this person because they've done something to you or they've opted in, then the data just disappears. If you have somebody that's that you've enrolled for shoplifting, then yes, there's some type of period that you'll want to keep them longer for case piece, but you have to justify that. And in our customers, we say you don't put PII into the system unless you have a reason. In this case, you put them in a loss prevention database that justifies why you're going to keep their picture over time. But we don't talk enough about the good part of what this, all the people, when any new technology, all the naysayers come out and try to shut it down. But I'm going to tell you some things that what we've learned over 2 years in the retail space. By enrolling these people, when the next time they come in the store, somebody from the store greets them and gives them good customer service. And guess what? 60% of the people that we've enrolled in the system, after the third time they're approached, they don't come and steal from that store anymore. And 80% is within 10 visits. So that takes your lower level shoplifter, we're changing their behavior. They're not getting arrested, they're not going to court, they're just ceasing to steal from this store and hopefully eventually ceasing to steal if enough people have it. And then you can concentrate on that 20% that's organized retail crime that's affecting all of us and all of society in a lot of ways. So that's the type of story that needs to get out.
Thank you. So Michael McLaughlin from the Center for Data Innovation. So one of the, I guess, the skeptics I've seen say is that yes, in the NIST testing, that there's a lack of bias between different demographic groups. But then they question whether that bias exists maybe in the wild, in real life scenarios. So could Mel or David just talked about, I guess, the accuracy across different demographic groups in the wild scenarios?
Sure, I'm happy to talk to that. So it is true that every benchmarking is limited to the data set that is being benchmarked and is not universalizable outside of that. It's should be indicative, kind of directionally informational about how the technology should perform, but ultimately every data set is different. And when you're looking at commercial applications, there are a lot of commercial applications where the developer controls the camera, controls the setup, controls the lighting situation, and that situation is unique. And the technology is going to perform uniquely under those circumstances. So we always encourage all users to collect their own data, benchmark their own performance on that data to understand how is it really going to perform under my operating conditions. That said, we always point back to NIST because it's the only scientifically performed benchmarking that exists. Every other report or accuracy success ratio that you see, or we crushed Megaface or whatever, it's not scientific. And the NIST benchmarking is very focused on the passport scenario and the law enforcement scenario, and that is representative of both the history of face recognition and the government interest in it. NIST is performing that for their customers who are the passport agencies and the law enforcement users. We think that it would be a huge service to the industry for NIST to expand that, to show selfie imagery, cross-compare. If you're comparing a selfie to a driver's license photo and even a picture of the driver's license itself, which is different from the driver's license photo because there are watermarks and holograms and security features that then make it more complicated. We'll see if that that happens, because even for NIST, data availability is a big challenge. So in the wild, it's hard to say. Our best directional understanding is from the NIST reports, and from kind of anecdotal reports back from our users and system developers around what they're seeing, and we're not seeing the bias, at least in those reports.
Great. Well, we're right at time, so I want to stop here. I did want Mel to give you a chance to just mention the demo that you have outside with your team for anyone who's interested.
Okay, yeah. So what we have done is we've actually put a system just on the side of the room out here that is an actual active camera with a system that we started doing some testing with here with our faces and is deployed to this. If you want to come see some of what we've been able to deploy and how we're using the system out here, we do have it. We'll be here right after the meeting to please come up and talk to us about what we have, and you can see exactly an implementation of what we have here at this environment.
Great.
Thank you.
Is there a picture of you, Mel, before your beard and after your beard?
There is not, because actually, good. I'm glad you brought that point up, because we just so everyone's aware of, the system that here is not connected to anywhere except for that laptop and the camera that's connected to it. It's not. We don't run any of our stuff out to the internet. We're not running a cloud-based solution here. So anything we've collected today as well will be totally wiped out when we leave here. So we're not so no, I don't have any pictures of me without the beard and some of the other things that are out there. But we can show you some of the things we can do today.
Well, please join me in thanking our panel, and thank you for being here today.